Washington, D.C., the chamber of the House of Representatives buzzed with tension. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood at the microphone, preparing to ask her questions during the hearing on judicial independence. What was expected to be a routine political back and forth soon exploded into something unforgettable. Chief Justice of the United States John Roberts had been invited as the main witness. His presence alone generated excitement, especially amid growing criticism of judges accused of political bias and ethical misconduct. Roberts, in his typical composed style, appeared confident. As he responded to questions from Republicans and a few moderate Democrats, everything seemed routine. But when the microphone passed to Jasmine Crockett, the atmosphere shifted. "Chief Justice Roberts," she began calmly, though her voice carried a cold edge of steel, "you have repeatedly stated that the judicial system must remain apolitical. However, a series of your recent actions and inactions suggest otherwise." Roberts squinted. He wasn't used to being addressed in such a tone by a young legislator, and he clearly underestimated Crockett. "Congresswoman Crockett," he said with a faintly mocking tone, "you seem to misunderstand quite a bit, and to be frank, I believe you are simply unqualified to speak on matters of judicial structure." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Someone gasped. Someone whispered, "Did he really say that?" Jasmine waited in silence for a few seconds. Then she straightened up, looked Roberts squarely in the eyes, and spoke. "Chief Justice, you've just devalued not only me, but my entire electorate. I am an attorney who has practiced in federal courts. I've worked within the system you claim to protect. I've faced real injustice, unlike you, perched on a marble throne in a cloud of privilege and untouchability. My qualifications aren't just a law degree, they're rooted in daily fights for the truth, from which you appear long removed." Roberts opened his mouth, but she didn't let him speak. "You called me unqualified, I call you unaccountable. You lead a system where judges can accept gifts from billionaires, where you ignore demands for transparency, and yet you dare to judge my qualifications? You forget who represents the people here, and who hides behind black robes and political maneuvering." The murmurs grew louder. A few members of the House began to clap. The chair of the hearing struck the gavel, calling for order. Jasmine continued, her voice unwavering. "You demand respect for the judiciary? Then start with respect for the truth. Start with respect for the people affected by your decisions every single day. And while you insult with words like unqualified, you're eroding the very trust you claim to defend." She paused, scanned the room, and quietly added, "And if you can't see how disgraceful your words were today, perhaps you are the one unqualified for the role you hold." And Jasmine Crockett remained standing at the microphone, silent but the undeniable victor of this intellectual and moral duel. Dead silence. Not a single voice dared to break the moment. A few moments later, Roberts stood and, without a word, left the chamber, and Jasmine Crockett remained standing at the microphone, silent but the undeniable victor of this intellectual and moral duel. Roberts was nearly at the exit when he stopped. Apparently her words hadn't just stung, their impact lingered. He turned, slowly walked back to the table, and without waiting for the chair's permission, began to speak, softer now, but with a note of bitter tension. "Congresswoman Crockett, I may have spoken harshly, and perhaps that was a mistake. But do not think your passionate speech frees you from responsibility for undermining the institution I serve." Jasmine stepped forward. She was no longer attacking. Now her voice carried a deep, almost tragic seriousness. "I'm not undermining the court, Justice. I'm protecting it. Because if we, the representatives of the people, don't call things by their names, trust in your system will collapse. Not because of our words, but because of your actions." Roberts shook his head. "You don't understand how fragile this balance is. If you continue this kind of rhetoric, people will lose faith not just in the court, but in the law itself." Jasmine stepped even closer, now no more than 10 feet from him. She looked him directly in the eyes. "And you don't understand that they're already losing faith, not because of words, because of verdicts that defy common sense, because of decisions made in favor of the rich and powerful, because of silence when there should have been apology, Because women are losing rights, Black Americans are losing protection, and you remain silent, or worse, complicit. Roberts sighed. His face looked ashen. You see the world through a lens of struggle, but the law cannot be built on struggle. It must rise above it. Then rise, Justice, she answered quietly. Rise high enough to see those below, because if you don't, they will rise themselves. And when they do, your marble throne may prove to be no sturdier than paper. The chamber remained tense and silent. No one dared disturb the moment. It was too fragile, too real. Roberts slowly sat back down, not as a man in control, but as someone who had heard something he could no longer ignore. Perhaps, he murmured, it's time I reconsider some views. Jasmine nodded. She said nothing. She simply returned to her seat, leaving behind a silence that echoed with every word she had spoken. The committee chairman nervously struck the gavel, trying to restore procedural order, but no one responded. Everyone present, lawmakers, aides, reporters, spectators, remained silent, eyes fixed on the two figures at the center of the room. Jasmine Crockett stood at her place, staring straight ahead, as if mentally returning to every word spoken. John Roberts, still seated, looked away, unable to hide his inner conflict. His face, usually composed, now seemed exposed. After a long pause, he spoke again. Congresswoman Crockett, perhaps I made a mistake not only in my words, but in my assumptions. I came here expecting formalities, routine criticism, but you brought a challenge. And perhaps that's exactly what the system needs. Not obedient deference, but an honest mirror. Crockett raised her eyebrows, a bit surprised by the tone in which those words came. This isn't a challenge, Justice. It's a cry from millions who don't have your platform. I'm just voicing what they feel. And you're one of the few who can actually change something. Not when it's convenient, but now. He nodded, slowly. His fingers rested on the wooden surface of the table, and his voice grew firmer. Then tell me plainly, Congresswoman, what would you want from me? From us, the judges? If not lofty talk about neutrality, then what? Jasmine stepped closer. Her voice was quiet, almost intimate, but clearly audible. I want you to stop being afraid of the truth. I want judges to declare conflicts of interest. I want you to stop hiding behind ancient immunity when people's lives are at stake. I want you to return meaning to the word justice. Roberts pressed his lips together, thoughtful. He seemed like a man who, for the first time in a long while, had heard not what he wanted, but what he needed to hear. This is more than just words, he muttered. Of course it is, she replied, and I hope you didn't just hear it, but felt it. He looked at her with a hint of respect that hadn't been there before, not because he had changed, but because he could no longer pretend that everything was the same. You've just given me more to think about than most legal reviews in a year. Thank you, Congresswoman. You're welcome, she said, but this isn't a lecture, Justice. It's a warning. This time, no one held back the applause. It began in the corner of the room, from one young aide, and quickly spread across the chamber. Some members of the committee stood up. The chairman did not stop them. Reporters were already typing up headlines. The microphones were still on. This day would go down in history as the moment when the Chief Justice was confronted and did not turn away. And Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett was no longer just a new face in politics. She had become a voice that could not be silenced. The air in the Capitol was electric. Whispers filled the corridors. Journalists sprinted with their phones, and political commentators prepped emergency broadcasts. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett left the chamber calmly. Her steps were confident, her gaze focused. She didn't smile, accept congratulations, or seek cameras. She had done what needed to be done. Now silence, but not around her, inside. Within an hour, video of the confrontation had amassed millions of views. Headlines spread in every direction. Jasmine Crockett exposes Roberts live. Congresswoman versus Supreme Court. Who's truly qualified? A moment of truth for the judiciary. The White House gave no official statement, but unnamed sources revealed the president closely watched the recording and expressed admiration for Crockett's courage. The next morning, the New York Times published a column by a former appellate judge. A young congresswoman said what we judges have long known, but feared to admit. 3 days later, unexpectedly, John Roberts submitted a proposal to the Ethics Committee calling for the creation of an independent oversight body for the Supreme Court. It caused a sensation. No precedent existed. But perhaps even he now felt the time for plain talk had come. As for Jasmine Crockett, she did not seek fame. She returned to her work. But the people did not forget. Her voice, calm, steadfast, just, had become a symbol that truth could be stronger than titles. And someday when history remembers this day, it will not call it a scandal. It will call it the beginning of change.